Hi, welcome back with another movie explanation. Today, I'm going to explain a sci-fi romance film called The Philadelphia Experiment. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The film opens with a scene where we see some information rolling up. The information explains that the US Navy conducted a series of tests to make the Allied ship invisible to the enemies, and by invisible, they meant that they will do a project which will make their ship invisible in the radar. And the final project is also being terminated. But what happens after that, this movie is about. On a rainy day, we see Dr. James listening to a radio and doing some research or checking something with numerous papers in front of him, and he seems to be tense about it. Another man, his assistant, comes from behind and lights a cigarette. Seeing his friend in exertion, he tells James to get some sleep, but James is still worried about the experiment and whether it is going to work perfectly or not. He says we might have missed something, to which his friend replied, 1,000 triple checks and we might have missed something? James, tomorrow we make history, and then leaves. After the scene, we see some Navy officers dancing with smooth jazz in the background. And in here, we are introduced to two new characters and the protagonists of this movie, David Herderg and Jimmy Parker. David and Jimmy are two United States Navy sailors, and they are assigned to the destroyer escort USS Eldridge during a project to make it invisible to radar. We see both of them dancing with their girlfriend, and they are terming that as the last dance. Jimmy will be having a baby with his girlfriend Pam. As the song changes, Jimmy and David's girlfriend Doris starts dancing together. David and Pam went for a drink and were having a talk. David congratulates Pam for having the baby. David also says that Jimmy is a lucky guy, to which Pam says, "Well, you had your chance." Two other sailors saw James from the window while he was going to his car, and the sailor said that he looked so happy because he knew something about the experiment that they didn't know. While David and Pam were drinking and having a chat, Jimmy came and took Pam to dance. The next scene is on a bright sunny day, and the sailors are going towards the harbor, and the USS Eldridge was anchored. David looked at it profoundly. While the men were heading towards the harbor, Jimmy notices that there was Pam by her car and said, "I love you," and Pam replied, "I love you too." Just after Jimmy and his men went for the frame, we see Pam a little tense about what's going to happen. While Jimmy and David were checking everything on the ship, James came and greeted them good morning, and David greeted him back. James asked him, "Have you checked the communications link to the shore?" David replies, "Yes sir, clear as a bell." Just after this conversation, there was an announcement which basically said that all visitors must go out now, and so James left from there. Just after he left, Jamie said in disgust, "What the hell was that about?" To which David said casually that he doesn't know. There are other workers and engineers who are checking the radar. Jimmy and David were standing on the deck smoking cigarettes. An announcement happened and they rushed inside. James along with his assistant were also on board by that time, and James's assistant told the captain to turn on the generators, and the captain forwarded this information to David and Jimmy, and they turned on the generators. Then they also turned on the power to the main field. As soon as they turned the power on, the radar started moving, and we could see abnormal radiations on the screen, and there was something with Jimmy's and David's body too. The Eldritch stars are beginning to fade in the radar, and that was unbelieving. The captain congratulates Dr. James. They were happy about the fact that they are going to vanish the whole German fleet. But right after this, there were some problems to be seen in the other people, and there was a hodgepodge. From the weird strange radiations that were coming, the ship legit vanished from the water, and not only from the radar. Dr. James came out to see what's going on, and saw the ship has vanished. The captain saw this and he couldn't believe the fact that James told him to contact Jimmy and told him to kill the generators, but he finds out that they have broken off the communications, but he still tried to get to them. They tried to switch off the main power and the generator off, but everything they touched, the machines were giving electrical shocks to them. So David just decided to get off the ship, and David and Jimmy ran to escape from the precarious condition. They jumped off a ship that was not into water but a strange portal, and they didn't know where they were. Jimmy said that he could see stars, moons, and they concluded that it was the night sky. They were searching for the ship, and at this moment, something like a spaceship was approaching towards them. They tried to run away from the aircraft that was following them, and both of them ran into a security fence, which again gave them a shock. There were fires coming out of the fence, which eventually struck the aircraft too, causing it to explode. Both David and Jimmy were stumbling and running in confusion. They walked the whole night and suddenly came into a desert. They were discussing that how there's a desert out of nowhere. They assumed that there's a desert in Philadelphia. Jimmy saw a water body. and David told him that it was a mirage because they are in the midst of a desert right now. They found a highway after walking miles and saw a car passing by. They hid behind a wrecked car, and another truck went by. We see some men at the area where David and Jimmy were on the first place. There were military trucks and helicopters, and they were examining the place and tried to get what happened there last night. They also found a shattered aircraft. Jimmy and David reached a petrol pump where he saw a man and a woman fashioned bizarrely. They got into the cafe by the gas pump and had coffee and scrambled eggs. David asked the lady at the counter if there was any telephone nearby. There was already a lady who was using the telephone. She cut the phone, sensing that there was someone who was also waiting for the telephone. While David was using the telephone, Jimmy was still having a problem with his hand, and it was turning orange. It seems that there was some kind of radiation coming from his hand. Jimmy's energy discharged from his hand smashes two arcade games in the restaurant, and the enraged diner owner pulls a pistol and demands that Jimmy pay for the damages. Jimmy says he didn't do it intentionally, but still the owner wasn't ready to listen to them. The men flee and carjack a car in the parking lot when David gets a pistol. David grabs the driver, a lady called Allison, as a prisoner, and drives because he could not find the clutch when he got into the car, and he's uncomfortable with the automatic transmission. They are taken aback when he informs them that they are in the year 1984. They ask some questions to the lady, which she found very abnormal. They ask her what place was it, what was the time. They are finally arrested by the cops. Jimmy, who is having more severe seizures, has been admitted to the hospital. David was still in jail, and the lady came to the jail and bailed him out. David claims that he and Jimmy inadvertently traveled across the time, but no one believes him. Jimmy ultimately vanishes from his hospital bed in a whirlpool of activity. David and Allison then flee military police who had arrived to arrest David. Because Jimmy's from neighboring California, David resolves to look for his relatives. He and Allison look up the family in the phone book and drive to visit them. Jimmy's wife, Pamela, who is now a senior citizen, recognizes David from 1943. She claims that the Eldridge returned minutes after it vanished, and that many of the sailors on board were severely burnt. Jimmy had also returned, only to be reprimanded and hospitalized for disclosing the truth about a brief journey to 1984. David inquires about himself and discovers that he has not returned. David notices Jimmy riding a horse outside a window, but Jimmy, who has slowly come to grips with the odd events of 1943, refuses to talk with David. As David and Allison unwillingly depart, they notice military police coming, resulting in a high-speed pursuit across Jimmy's property. When the following car crashes in flames, the two manage to invade them. David recovers paperwork, naming Dr. Longstreet from the smoldering wreck. David resolves to track down Longstreet after learning that he was engaged in the Philadelphia experiment in 1943. David and Allison fall in love as they spend time together. In 1984, Dr. Longstreet attempted to build a shield to guard against an ICBM assault, using the same technologies that were utilized in the first Philadelphia experiment. When the protected settlement was tested, it vanished into hyperspace, exactly like the USS Eldridge. Despite turning off the electricity, the scientists are unable to stop the experiment. Worse, the experiment has created a vortex in 1984, which is attracting materials. The vortex produces very unstable and violent weather, including tornadoes and massive lightning strikes. Longstreet believes that the vortex will continue to grow until it consumes the entire globe. The scientists send a probe into the vortex and find Eldridge within. The two experiments are linked across time. The generators on the Eldridge, they believe, are supplying the energy to keep the vortex open. David kidnaps an assistant at Longstreet's house and forces him to transport them to the base, but he is apprehended as they exit the elevator at the control center. Longstreet orders the military police to let David in and explains the situation to him. He informs David that according to the surviving sailors, the ship returned to Philadelphia in 1943 after David turned off the generator. Longstreet claims that David must travel to the vortex to the Eldridge and turn off the generator before the vortex destroys the Earth. Allison does not trust Longstreet and advises David not to go save his ship, but he offers and is provided with an electrically insulated suit that allows him to shut down the generator. He is thrown into the vortex and arrives on the deck of the Eldridge, where he discovers a terrified and injured crew. He rushes to the generator room, smashing an array of vacuum tubes with a firefighting axe. The generator is turned off, and David searches for Jimmy. David goes over to the side of the ship and departs, confident that Jimmy is safe. Longstreet and the other Eldridge resurface in Philadelphia in 1943. The long-distance watchers notice that some crew are badly burnt, while others are welded alive onto the ship's hull. There, he encounters a young Parker again, rescuing him and the rest of the ship as the energy runs out. But before the Eldritch reappears in 1943, Herder leaps out of it, leaving him in 1984 to be with his beloved Allison. Similarly, the vanished town returns in 1984. Allison borrows a vehicle to get there. She runs into David and they share a passionate kiss. The Philadelphia Experiment is a 1984 American science fiction film. It is directed by Stewart Raffill and stars Michael Parr, Bobby DeKiko, and Nancy Allen, and based on the urban legend of the Philadelphia Experiment. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to let me know how you feel about today's video in the comments down below. Stay safe and never forget, you are awesome.